Okay, we got it. Sorry about that. My boyfriend had a last minute work call he had to take care of real quick. And his work computer is right next to mine, so there's nothing I can do about that. So, good evening, good evening. I guess you've already seen the title of the stream tonight, which is morality.
We call it a champion.
So I have a video we're gonna watch. I haven't watched it yet, so I've seen a couple minutes of it, but that's it. I have not pre-watched this. We got our friend, well, I say our friend because I've watched a couple of his videos on stream already, I think. William Lane Craig and a new guy named Shelly Kagan. Shelly Kagan. I don't know. He'll pronounce it himself in a second. And the topic is, or the title of the debate is God necessary for morality? Which is a topic I'm very passionate about. And they also discuss, is morality objective, subjective, and, go over all that stuff too, which I think is fun to talk about. So, sorry for the super long intro, so I'll just shut up and we can get right into it. It's a really low quality video. It's like 480 pixels, so bear with me. There's nothing I can do to make it better. And when I was trying to find videos on this topic, there weren't that many. There were not that many morality debates. So if you guys know of one yourself that you happen to like, that you would like for me to cover on stream potentially, you can send those to me. Sometimes links don't work in chat, so I'll put my email address in chat. Send me recommendations of videos you'd like to see covered on stream, not screen. There we go. Yeah, I am ghosty@gmail.com. Okay. So we're gonna start from the beginning. And here we go.
It's a Twitch name, not a rap name. You gotta keep it.
It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Veritas Forum for inviting me, and I want to thank Bill Craig for agreeing to this discussion, this debate. The topic for tonight's debate is whether God is necessary for morality. Is God necessary for morality? I'm going to be arguing that a belief in God or the existence of God is not necessary for morality. I'm at a bit of a handicap in doing this. I spoke to one of my colleagues, another moral philosopher, gave him the topic, is God necessary for morality? And his answer was, well, of course not. Now, I don't think the issue is quite as open and shut and black and white as that, but it does suggest, it does reveal, I suppose, a common outlook among moral philosophers that I share, that people have been doing moral philosophy without appeal to God for thousands of years, at the same time that they've also been doing moral philosophy that does appeal to God. It's not at all obvious to those of us who take a secular approach to doing moral philosophy what the problem is supposed to be. So I'm going to try to anticipate what some of the difficulties that Bill Craig will be raising, and maybe that's unfair. I don't mean to be saddling him with objections that he doesn't raise, or of course maybe I will be raising objections that he will go on to raise and he'll do a better job of it. So I may not get it quite right, but what I'll try to do is sketch a little bit about where I think a plausible account of morality might be that doesn't make use of the appeal to God, and try to answer some objections that one might raise against it. Second preliminary remark is I'll no doubt typically slip into talking about what the atheist might say or the atheist might believe, or an atheist approach to moral philosophy. And that's a bit of a misnomer, because I'm describing a view that's completely available to theists as well. And calling it an atheist view, I simply mean mean it's a view that does not make use of the appeal to God. It's not theistic, it is atheistic in that sense, and it's not necessarily limited to those.
And I guess William Lane Craig will also make the argument that his views on morality are also, not just a theist view. They can also be used as a. Actually, I don't know if they could be seen as a secular. I guess they couldn't be seen as a secular. I don't know why my camera keeps doing this. But I guess from his eyes, whether you believe in God or not doesn't matter. But yeah, I guess that's not really the same. It doesn't really apply the same because his belief is that you need God in order for morality to exist. So therefore it would kind of be a theist view. But he doesn't believe that in order for to have morality you have to believe in God. So
those who deny the existence of God. Let me start by putting aside a question that may be of interest to some of you, and if it does come up in the question period, I'm happy to address it at greater length. But one thing one might worry about in asking whether or not morality requires the existence of God is whether people could act morally if there is no God or if they didn't believe in God, whether moral motivation or moral behavior presupposes in some way belief in a deity. I certainly hope that it's apparent to every person in this audience that the answer to that question is certainly not. That is to say, atheists, and here I do mean atheists in the more narrow sense, people who deny the existence of God, are just as capable of acting morally as anybody else. They're just as capable of acting immorally as anybody else. Theists, at any rate, don't have any kind of monopoly on moral behavior. And I'm completely confident that Bill will agree about that. It's, I think, such a non-issue that I have, as I say, I'm going to say nothing more about it. The more interesting question, there are several questions one might pursue, but the one I'll be focusing on, what I take to be perhaps the most interesting question, is whether or not we need God for there to be morality, for there to be a genuine difference between right and wrong. Here we think of God not as the motivator for moral behavior, but rather God as the source or the author or the ground of morality, its basis. And so the question I'll be focusing on is whether or not there can be a secular, non-theistic basis for morality, and I believe the answer to that is yes. Now, I could get off at this point, except, of course, again, I don't think there's going to be any difference of opinion between Bill and me on the question, do non-theists believe in morality? Of course we all believe in morality. It's whether or not there could really be something. Am I, as an atheist, entitled to talk about right and wrong as something that genuinely exists without having God? So that's the question I'm going to focus on, not whether, people talk this way, whether the atheists talk this way, but whether there's some logical difficulty about their talking that way. So what I'm going to do is very quickly sketch an outline of a view about ethics that I find congenial. It's not at all original to me. I don't in any way mean to suggest it's the only kind of outline one could accept as an atheist trying to explain what morality is all about, but it'll give you an illustration of, I think, a fairly plausible approach, or so it seems to me. And then I'll raise some deeper questions about it. So here's the basic idea. Right and wrong is a matter of whether or not your behavior hurts people or fails to help them. So, which is, wrong action is action that hurts somebody or fails to help them in the relevant circumstances. And right action is basically a matter of those behaviors that refrain from hurting people and do provide help. So once we've got this basic idea in place, it's pretty natural to see how the more familiar rules of ordinary common sense morality fall out from that. We have an explanation as to why it is that you shouldn't lie, because lying hurts people, why you shouldn't commit murder, why you shouldn't rape, because rape hurts the victims of rape, why you have to aid the needy, why slavery is wrong, and why you need to clothe the naked and feed the hungry. In all these ways, these behaviors are morally wrong or right because of their connection with harm and failure to help. Now, there's a lot of details that would need to get worked out. I think for tonight's purposes, they're not likely to be all that important. There are...
So I'm starting to lay down this idea that there's a set of inherently objective morals, and then further past that, there's subjective morality. And that subjectiveness has to do with the context of, the time and history. Also, just the context of the situation. So, something could be the right thing to do, even though it's morally wrong, like killing somebody in self-defense. Or killing somebody to save an innocent life that's about to be taken away for no reason themselves. So like killing is wrong, but killing somebody to protect another innocent person could be considered the right thing to do in that situation. So I think there is subjectivity to morality, but I do think there are inherent objective moralities too that almost every human being has come to an agreement on, which is things like murder, rape, even lying, like hurting people without reason, like for example hurting somebody to provide some kind of medical care isn't morally wrong, but stabbing somebody just to hurt them for pain is morally wrong. So I do think there is subjectivity to there, but I do think there is an inherent objective morality too, and a lot of that probably comes from learning how to survive, since we are such social and communal creatures. If we want the best success for our species to procreate and thrive and survive, we need morals in order to, do that. So, okay, let's see. Tiki Tack says, I think many theists and atheists can come to an agreement there is objective morality. The question is, where does it come from to be objective? What sets the standard? Exactly. That is the question, and that is what we will get into furthermore in this debate.
Let me just mention that, of course, it's important to get clear that there's a variety of ways that people can be hurt. There's not just physical harm, but there's emotional harm, and there's assaults on somebody's autonomy, and you can fail to respect them in a variety of ways. I don't think I need to pursue that, so unless it comes up, I won't say more about that. And the second point is that, of course, to say that you can't ever harm is a bit of a simplification. There are going to be cases in which one would have an adequate justification for harming somebody else. For example, in cases of self-defense against a deliberate aggressor. There's a great deal of work in contemporary moral philosophy about what these exception cases are, what are the adequate justifications for harming or failing to help. And again, although I'm happy to go there, I don't think we need to, so I won't say more about it unless it comes up. Now, that's the nutshell of the moral theory that I believe in, and clearly I didn't say anything about God, and so it seems to me I'm entitled to say that I believe in morality, and I'm entitled to believe in morality, and the question I only want to ask at this point is, why would anybody think otherwise? Well, so here's a worry that one might have. We might ask, not do I believe in this sort of thing, but are these things really wrong on the atheist view that I've just sketched? Or is it just a matter of opinion? Now that's tricky. Of course, we're going to be arguing about whether or not God's necessary for morality, what shape morality has, and so forth and so on. And all of that, in some sense, is just a matter of opinion. But I take it the deeper question is there a fact of the matter as to who's right? Now, just as there's a fact of the matter as to whether or not there is a God and what that God is like, I take it there's a fact of the matter with regard to whether or not it's wrong to harm people, whether it's wrong to rape, for example. I think it's wrong to rape. I take this to not just be a matter of opinion. It's not as though if I thought otherwise rape would be okay, or if everybody thought otherwise rape would be okay. Rape is wrong, full stop. So at least if you're worried about whether there could be genuine morality, where there are facts of the matter, then on an atheist account, I'm inclined to think, well, of course there can. We might wonder, what makes it wrong? And the answer is, well, it's wrong because, for example, rape is wrong because it harms the victim. You might ask instead, what do we mean in saying that it's wrong to rape? Now, this is a controversial matter, and not all moral philosophers agree about the ingredients that we need to build into the basic definition of right and wrong. But roughly, I take it that as at least a first pass, the thought is something like to believe in morality as a genuine, objective state of affairs is to believe that there are reasons to act morally, to help others and to avoid harming them, and that these reasons don't depend on the particular desires or goals you happen to have. It's not as though if you happen to care about truth, justice, and the American way, then you've got a reason to act morally. No, everybody has these reasons. These reasons are overriding, to use philosophers' jargon, their category.
See, like, I think a good counterpoint to why it's actually harmful to say we need God for morality is because it's almost similar to saying we need a criminal justice system for morality. It's like, we don't want people to not murder each other and rape each other and you know, fraud each other and stuff, just because if they do, there's a consequence of going to jail. We want people to not murder, rape, and fraud each other because we're all humans, and you know, we want to act civilly for the betterment of our society. We're not getting anything from acting morally and treating each other well. And I think that's the problem with saying morals come from God, because essentially you're kind of getting something from it. If you act morally, you go to heaven. If you don't act morally, you don't go to heaven. There's an incentive there. Instead of just doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, it's like you need somebody to tell you that it's the right thing to do, instead of just understanding it's the right thing to do because, you know, we want to care for one another as we do for ourselves.
Categorical reasons. So when I say that it's an objective fact that rape is wrong, what I'm saying is there's this kind of overriding, strong, categorical reason not to harm people in this way. And that's not up to me to make it so, it's just so. Now, we might ask, is there a deeper account that can be offered about where these reasons come from, or what makes them so, or the basic rules of morality, what their ultimate foundation or basis is? And I want to say that secular atheist philosophers disagree about that point. Some are, as we might call them, non-foundationalists. They say, well, we can state the various moral rules, keep your promises, tell the truth, don't tell lies, don't hurt people, help the needy. And if we want, we can boil these rules down into a simpler set of rules. I've suggested don't harm, do help.
What's up? Good to see you.
But there may be nothing at all deeper to be said about what makes those rules what makes those rules the valid rules. It's just an objective fact about reality that there are these categorical reasons. There are reasons to behave in certain ways versus other. So that's not just a matter of opinion. There are facts about what there are reasons to do, and these may be among the reasons that there's nothing deeper to say. But there are also philosophers who believe there is something more to say. And again, unsurprisingly, different philosophers will disagree about what that deeper story looks like. Let me give a very quick sketch of one such story. I think it's not bad as far as it goes. Ultimately, I think there's even more to say, but that would take us a rather long time to say that more. So let me just give you the quick sketch. It's a version of the view that's known as contractarianism. The thought is that the moral rules are the rules that we would give to one another to govern our interactions with one another, the rules that we would agree to if we were to set about trying to settle on a bunch of rules to govern our interactions under the assumption that we were perfectly rational. Nobody wants to follow rules that people accept because of mistakes in their reasoning. So imagine us, but soup ourselves up to be reasoning perfectly rational beings would agree to various rules to govern their interactions. And the rules that they agree to are the terms of morality. Now, there's different ways of running this contractarian thought. One version of it, which I have some sympathies to, adds an extra twist. The reasoning needs to take place behind a so-called veil of ignorance. The thought is, I'm not going to know while I'm engaged in this hypothetical bargaining session what my actual position in society is. I won't be able to try to rig things in favor of white males because I won't know that I'm a white male. So I argue from behind this veil of ignorance about my actual identity. So that's the basic thought. So here we have a kind of deeper story. Where do the moral rules come from? They are the rules we would give to ourselves to govern our behavior with one another insofar as we were perfectly rational. Does this capture a notion of objectivity for ethics? Seems to me the answer is yes. There's a fact of the matter about what it would be rational for us to agree to in terms of these rules. One might wonder, is the output of this hypothetical, imaginary bargaining session, are the moral rules necessary? Maybe that's another feature we're looking for in trying to genuinely get morality as opposed to merely the illusion or appearance of morality. And the answer to that is yes, I believe they are necessary. Now, if you're a non-foundationalist, if you don't think there is a deeper story of the contractarian sort that I sketched, or some other deeper story that other moral philosophers have sketched, if you're a non-foundationalist, you might just stop it right here. You might say, to say that murder is wrong is to say that there's a categorical reason not to murder, and this isn't a contingent truth, it's a necessary truth. It's a truth that obtains, as philosophers like to put it, in all possible worlds, that murder would be wrong. If we do go the contractarian route, then we instead might put our necessity a little bit deeper. We might say something like, the moral truths are necessary, but their truth is itself explained in terms of the social contract, and that in turn is explained in terms of the fact that there are certain truths about reasoning, and these are necessary truths. It's a necessary fact that perfectly rational beings would reason about what kinds of rules they wanted to give to one another in such and such a way. So I think we can get the necessity of morality as well. Here's a rather different objection that might get raised. We have the thought that morality involves commandments. We have the thought.
Yeah, and back to that point of what he's saying, like morality, having morality for the sake of being able to reason with each other. I think that's really important, and I think religion tends to, or like maybe not, I don't know, I think in specific cases religion does tend to cause a strict divide in being able to reason morally, because there are these set, so, you know, quote unquote, like commands, so-called like commandments, and, you know, in other religions they're called, I don't know, tenets or something. There's all these rules and guidelines of what is morally right and morally wrong. And some of these things don't ultimately come down to hurting anyone else. It's just like, this is something that's part of our religion that we consider morally wrong. Like having sex before marriage, right? That's not really harming anybody as long as it's consensual. It's not, it doesn't really, I don't know. There's no argument that I can make where like sex before marriage is wrong other than because it's a part of one's religion. Like you could try to make arguments like, oh well, people who stay virgins until their wedding day have better relationships or something. Okay, but we have plenty of examples of people who haven't remained virgins till their wedding day who also have wonderful relationships. So when we are kind of like granted these morals instead of coming to morals just like naturally through the experience of living as a person and understanding, what something we don't want done to us is something we probably shouldn't do to somebody else. I don't like being lied to. I don't like being cheated on. I don't like being hurt or bullied or treated unfairly and stuff like that. So I shouldn't do that to somebody else. But instead we have these, I don't know, it creates a division and it makes it hard to reason with people because they're coming from a place of religion instead of just like a natural way of living, I guess. It's like their beliefs instead of it's just like based on their beliefs that come from a religion, which again is fine, but it makes it difficult to reason morality when you have these commandments and tenets and stuff. Well, okay, Tiki Tac said, well, the morality you are describing comes from naturalism, where religion, it's people who genuinely believe God exists and God makes the rules. And if you genuinely believe God exists and sets the rules, why wouldn't you follow God's rules? Where religion, it's people to genuinely believe God exists. Where religion is people who genuinely believe God exists and God makes rules. If you genuinely, I understand, but that's what I'm saying is if you genuinely believe God exists because, let's say, you were raised under a certain religion and this is what you believe because you were raised to believe this, or you learnt it or something, there's already these set of rules that tell you what is right and wrong rather than coming to those conclusions yourself. And some of those rules don't have to do with hurting other people, like example, having sex before marriage or homosexuality and stuff like that. These don't involve hurting other people. They're just a set of morals that certain religions have, and then it makes it difficult to reason morality with because their argument is that it's their religious beliefs that tell them it's immoral.
Thought that morality involves requirements. We talk about moral laws. So sometimes it's suggested that
and again, like having your own beliefs is fine if you think something is wrong, but once people try to start implementing those beliefs into the law and trying to stop other people from doing something with their lives when they're not hurting anybody else, and restricting other people's way of lives, that's when it becomes difficult. Without lies, Islam dies, says Ugh.
there's a commandment there's got to be a commander. Where there's a law, there's got to be a lawgiver. Where there's a requirement, there's got to be a requirer. Who plays the role of commander, lawgiver, requirer? Well, it's got to be God. And so it turns out if we're really going to have the notion not just of moral reason to behave in this way or that way, but rather moral requirements to behave in one way rather than another way, then we need to appeal to God after all, to be the lawgiver. This is an argument that's been proposed by various theistic philosophers. Indeed, this very argument's been embraced by some atheistic philosophers who said, yeah, talk of moral requirements does presuppose a lawgiver. Now that I no longer believe in God, I believe there are no moral requirements. Now, I'm not myself inclined to go that way. I'm perfectly prepared to talk about moral requirements. I think it's a completely appropriate thing to do. In fact, it would be inappropriate, it would be just simply mistaken, full stop, to give up talk about moral requirements. So the question I want to push a little bit is it really true that requirements require a requirer? That's a mouthful. And I'm inclined to believe the answer to that is actually no. Let's take an example of a requirement outside the moral domain. I suppose that when we are engaged in reasoning about belief matters, theoretical reasoning, it's a requirement of appropriate reasoning that you not contradict yourself. People sometimes talk about the law of non-contradiction. I take this to be a requirement of rationality, that you not contradict yourself. Now, should we similarly conclude that since there's a requirement, there's a law of non-contradiction, there must be a lawgiver, there must be some cosmic logician who commands us not to contradict ourselves? Doesn't seem to me to be so. I mean, I can imagine that somebody does say that, but I don't myself feel the force of thinking if there's a law of non-contradiction, that is just to say that it's a claim that it's just fundamentally irrational to contradict yourself, I don't see any reason to conclude from that there must be some cosmic logician laying down that law. As we might put it, the logic of the word requirement does not actually entail the existence of a requirer. That's at least seems to me the most natural thing to say about the law of non-contradiction. If we want, we can say, I don't think any harm in saying that reason itself requires that you not contradict yourself. And that's fine. I don't have any problem talking that way. That just, of course, doesn't, I mean, it's talking about reason in a somewhat personified fashion, but no harm done as long as we understand there doesn't actually have to be a person who laid down the law of non-contradiction. Well, similarly then, I want to say that with regard to the various moral requirements, we don't need a lawgiver for them to be genuine requirements. If we want, we can say.
Right, so I think like what he's trying to say is, do we need, in order to be logical, do we need like a logical giver? Or are these, is logic something that has come to us, again, quite naturally because of survival reasons, survival of the fittest. We are our strongest survival, our survival strong suit is our intellect, is our logic. So, in order to reason and be reasonable and logical, do we need a logic giver? I don't think so. I think it's just been not given to us, but we've kind of evolved to make it so. Animals don't utilize logic for survival. Why are humans so unique to those fundamentals? I mean, you could say that about anything. It would be like birds. Some animals don't fly to utilize, like, not all animals have wings to utilize for their survival. Why is that unique? Some some animals breathe underwater. They have gills and they breathe underwater for survival. Why? It's just the way we evolved. And, life works, survival of the fittest. And so far, our logic has taken us very far. So we're going to procreate more, and there's going to be more logic and intellect that comes from that because that's what's taken us so far. So the ways of survival that work, I mean, I know you know how survival of the fittest works, but the ways that the tactics that different animals utilize to survive, the successful ones continue on and survive, and we happen to do that with our logic and reasoning and intellect skills, which probably comes from just our ancient ancestors' communal, the way we we're so social, and just our natural bodies. We don't have many other ways to protect ourselves, I guess, other than building things and power in numbers, having groups of people that work together to build things and stuff. That just sounds like storytelling. I mean, that's how it happened, though. Like, it's a pretty cool story, the story of evolution, but logic to me doesn't seem like a requirement for survival, and is a very complex thing to develop. You'd think it would be outmatched by strength.
They're driving and C4ing.
If you take the smartest people and put them on an island, and then you take the dumbest people and put them on another island, which island of people do you think will have the most survivors? The smartest people who can utilize their logic, or the dumbest people who aren't as good at innovation and creative thinking and utilizing logic? It's probably going to be the smartest people. So that just, it seems to me like a natural requirement for survival is outsmarting other animals, other animals and just nature in itself on how to get food, how to survive different weather circumstances, how we migrated, how to protect just all these things. Like we don't protect ourselves with shells or claws or teeth or fastness. We built guns and things. Well, for today's standard, I wouldn't think either would survive. Survival in nature is something most of us have lost. Sure, but either way, the people who are able to utilize their logic the most are going to have the best chance at survival.
There's a couple in our tortoise bond.
Say, in fact, it seems to be a perfectly legitimate thing to say, that reason requires that we act in accordance with reasons. It lays down these various categorical reasons not to harm people, to aid them. And so we can personify reason in that way, but all we just mean, I think, is that there are these compelling, decisive, objective, categorical reasons to behave in certain ways and not behave in other ways, or to reason in various ways. So I myself am skeptical of the claim that commandments require a commander, or requirements require a requirer, or that law requires a lawgiver. So some of you may be more sympathetic to that suggestion than I am. Indeed, some of my colleagues are more sympathetic to that suggestion than I am. It's important to bear in mind that although I have the particular views I'm laying down here, it's not as though all non-theistic philosophers think about these issues in exactly the same way. If you brought up four of us, you'd probably get four different stories about how to ground morality in a secular fashion. Some of my colleagues are more sympathetic to the thought that talk of moral requirement really does entail that there be somebody who's commanding us to behave accordingly. And then we might ask, well, if that's so, who could it be besides God? And the answer I want to give on behalf of those of you and my colleagues who are sympathetic to the suggestion, the answer should be all of us. We, the members
I was going to say ourselves, but
of the moral community, are the ones who are laying down these requirements. That idea is especially, I think, a natural fit if we accept the contractarian theory that I was sketching, albeit too quickly, sketching in my earlier remarks. If we think of the rules of morality as emerging from this hypothetical session in which we ask ourselves, how shall we behave towards one another, except we face this question hypothetically in the mode of perfect rationality, what would perfectly rational beings lay down as these rules? But these are rules that nonetheless we are giving to one another. Then when somebody, and we enter into these rules freely, because we see that it makes sense for us to reach these agreements. You can see why it would be rational for us to agree to rules requiring telling the truth, laying out, forbidding lying, forbidding murder, and so forth. Then these are rules that we give to one another. And consequently, if somebody breaks those rules, they're not upholding their part of the social contract. And as such, the rest of us who are indeed limiting our behavior in keeping with this agreement, we can appropriately and with due authority turn to the person who's acting immorally and saying, you shouldn't behave that way. You're not keeping up your end of the bargain. So if you think there needs to be somebody who's demanding of us that we act morally, the answer could be, well, there is. Each one of us is demanding of everybody else, and indeed demanding of ourselves as well, that we act morally. So if you think requirements need a requirer, the answer could be, well, here's a requirer. It's the members of the moral community. Well, obviously, there's a great deal more that needs to be said about all of these subjects, but I've used up my allotted 20 minutes. But I hope you can at least see the outlines of an approach. There are alternatives. An approach which offers us a fairly plausible, I think, account of what morality is all about, under which the rules of morality are not an illusion. They're not a mere matter of opinion. They are indeed a matter of objective fact. And consequently, I'm inclined to think that moral philosophers of an atheistic inclination are completely entitled to believe that we can have morality without God. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Craig does.
I didn't realize it had been that many Veritas Forum events over these years. Good evening, and thank you very much. I am delighted to have the invitation from the Veritas Forum to participate in the dialogue tonight, and I want to say it's a tremendous privilege to be sharing the podium with so eminent an ethicist as Shelly Kagan. The question before us this evening is God necessary for morality? Notice what the question is not asking. We are not asking whether belief in God is necessary for morality. No one in tonight's discussion is arguing that in order to live a moral life, you need to believe in God. Rather, the question, as Shelly emphasized, is whether God is necessary for morality. And the answer to that question, I think, obviously depends on what you mean by morality. If by morality you mean simply a certain pattern of social behavior prevalent among human beings, then obviously this sort of behavior could still go on even if it turned out that God does not exist. God isn't necessary in order for human beings to exhibit certain patterns of social behavior, which they call acting morally. But if by morality you mean that certain things are really good or evil, that certain actions are unconditionally obligatory or impermissible, then many atheists and theists alike agree that God is indeed necessary for morality. In the absence of God, morality turns out to be just a human convention or illusion. The same patterns of social behavior.
See, I just don't understand why it has to be called an illusion just because humans created it. It's almost like, it kind of feels like gaslighting a little bit. It's like, you know, this is something that humans have evolved to understand and live by these rules. It's not even like we have intentionally invented it, but it's something that we just end up living by. It's the way we live. It's the way we go about our daily lives. Why does that make it not real? Why does that make it an illusion? And rather to like, on the contrary, saying that something that God, that can't even be proven, something that this unprovable God says is what is more morality, what is more what and what isn't, that's not an illusion, even though we can't even prove God to begin with. But saying something that humans have kind of like a set of rules that humans have created or come up with or live by ourselves, he calls that an illusion? I don't understand that.
Might go on without God, but it would be a delusion to think that such behavior has any objective moral significance. Accordingly, I'm going to argue that God is necessary for morality in at least three distinct ways. Without God, objective moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability would not exist. Let's look at the first point. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Now, when we talk about moral values, we're talking about whether something is good or evil. To say that there are objective moral values is to say that something is good or evil independently of whether anybody believes it to be so. To say, for example, that the Holocaust was objectively evil is to say that it was evil, even though the Nazis who carried it out thought that it was good. And it would still have been evil, even if the Nazis had won World War II and succeeded in brainwashing or exterminating everybody who disagreed with them, so that everyone believed the Holocaust was good. My first claim is that if there is no God, then moral values are not objective in that sense. Traditionally, objective moral values have been based in God, who is the highest good. He is the locus and paradigm of moral value. God's own holy and loving nature supplies the absolute standard against which all actions are measured. He is by nature loving, generous, just, faithful, kind, and so forth.
Pause. How can that be true if life is not just, kind, generous, fair, like naturally? How could it be true that God is so? I guess the answer would be because in the end there's judgment given, with heaven and hell. It's just, I don't know, it's just hard for me because these things can't be proven and these are all just beliefs. So to say they are objective is just contradictory to me.
And thus, if God exists, objective moral values exist. But if God does not exist, what basis remains for objective moral values? In particular, why think that human beings would have moral worth? On the atheistic view, human beings.
I think you are giving too much credit to humanity in saying that we are generally good. I'm giving too much credit to... Well, I didn't say that humans are generally good, but I do think we can decipher generally what is good and what is bad. And whether we act good or bad is a different story, but I think most people can decipher what is good and what is bad. But nonetheless,
They're gonna have to make friends.
how wouldn't this argument work against religion though too? Because for the majority of history, most people have been religious and have had a belief in God. And I would definitely argue that we're getting less and less.
Yeah, I've gotten 3 comments.
I think we're acting less and less evil, or rather selfishly, as time goes on. That is something that can't be clearly answered in this text format. That is understandable.
Beings are just accidental byproducts of nature, which have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe in which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. On atheism, I can't see any reason to think that human well-being is objectively good, any more than insect well-being or dog well-being or monkey well-being. On a naturalistic view, moral values are just the byproduct of biological evolution and social conditioning. Just as a troop of baboons exhibit cooperative and even altruistic behavior because natural selection has determined it to be advantageous in the struggle for survival, so their primate cousins, Homo sapiens, have similarly evolved behavior for the same reason. As a result of sociobiological pressures, there has evolved among Homo sapiens a sort of herd morality which functions well in the perpetuation of our species. But on an atheistic view, there doesn't seem to be anything that makes this morality objectively true. The philosopher of science, Michael Ruse, reports, the position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is
Sorry, I just have to pause real quick. Sometimes when he's reading quotes, he reminds me of, his voice reminds me of the guy from, is it Jeopardy? When he's like reading the questions or the topics, his voice like in my head merges with that guy's voice. I wanted to point that out. Okay, I'll go back a couple seconds.
Set of claims about an objective something.
Welcome.
Ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. End quote. If we were to rewind the film of human evolution back to the beginning and start anew, people with a very different set of moral values might well have evolved. As Darwin himself wrote in The Descent of Man, If men were raised under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. For us to think that human beings are special and our morality objectively true is to succumb to the temptation of speciesism, that is to say, an unjustified bias toward one's own species. The objective worthlessness of human beings on a naturalistic worldview is underscored by two implications of that worldview: materialism and determinism. Naturalists are typically materialists or physicalists who regard man as a purely animal organism. But if there is no mind distinct from the brain, then everything we think and do is determined by the input of our five senses and our genetic makeup. There is no personal agent who freely decides to do something. But without freedom, none of our choices is morally significant. They're like the jerks of a puppet's limbs, controlled by the strings of sensory input and physical constitution. And what moral value does a puppet or its movements have? Richard Dawkins' assessment of human worth.
That's why I'm a compatibilist. But moving on.
May be depressing, but why on atheism is he mistaken when he says there is at bottom no...
Please don't spam the chat. I will have to mute you. Just warning. You may chat, but don't spam.
No design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. If there is no God, then any basis for regarding the herd morality evolved by Homo sapiens as objectively true seems to have been removed. Take God out of the picture, and all you seem to be left with is an ape-like creature on a tiny speck of dust beset with delusions of moral grandeur.
Except we're so much more than that. We're not just we are like an ape-like creature, but there's a lot more to us than that, obviously. We're not just living on a tiny speck of dust. It's a very complex planet that's just blooming of diversity and life and growth and evolution. And it's just, I just don't appreciate when the atheistic views, and I'm not even atheist, but when atheistic views are oversimplified like this.
Secondly, if God does not exist, objective moral duties do not exist. Duties have to do with whether something is right or wrong. Now, you might think at first that the distinction between right and wrong is the same as the distinction between good and evil. But if you think about it, you can see that this is not the case. Duty has to do with moral obligation, with what I ought or ought not to do. But obviously, you're not morally obligated to do something just because it would be good for you to do it. For example, it would be good for you to become a doctor, but you're not morally obligated to become a doctor. After all, it would also be good for you to become a firefighter or a homemaker or a diplomat, but you can't do them all. So there's a difference between moral values and moral duties.
I didn't know putting him in timeout for 5 minutes would delete all of his messages.
My claim is that if God does not exist, then it seems we have no objective moral duties. To say that we have objective moral, a doctor, after all, but you're not morally obligated to become a doctor. After all, it would also be good for you to become a firefighter or a homemaker or a diplomat, but you can't do them all. So there's a difference between moral values and moral duties. Now, my claim is that if God does not exist, then it seems we have no objective moral duties. To say that we have objective moral duties is again to say that we have certain moral obligations regardless of whether we think that we do. Traditionally, our moral duties were thought to spring from God's commandments, such as the Ten Commandments. Far from being arbitrary, these commands flow necessarily from His moral nature. On this foundation, we can affirm the objective rightness of love, generosity, self-sacrifice, and equality, and condemn as objectively wrong selfishness, hatred, abuse, discrimination, and oppression.
I'd say about half of the 10 Commandments are pretty based. They're pretty good. No complaints. The other half, though, seem to be just about putting God first. Don't put God's name in vain. Sunday is like the holy day. I've looked over the 10 Commandments on stream before. You guys are all Christians, so you probably know them. But a lot of the commandments, almost half of them, I think, it might be 4 out of 10, but almost half of them are about how you talk about God and how you worship God. And then the other half are like what I would consider, I'm pretty sure most of them are like objective moralities. So thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not cheat and stuff like that. Yeah.
But if there is no God, what basis remains for objective moral duties? On the atheistic view, human beings are just animals, and animals have no moral obligations to one another. When a lion kills a zebra, it kills the zebra, but it doesn't murder the zebra. When a great white shark forcibly copulates with a female, it forcibly copulates with her, but it does not rape her, for there is no moral dimension to these actions. They are neither prohibited nor obligatory.
Sure, yes. But that's because I would argue that many animals don't have free will. They act solely off of instinct. And although lions kill for food, lions don't kill for fun. They kill to teach their cubs how to hunt, and they kill for food. They don't kill for fun. You think about, again, this is a Hollywood scenario, but you think about Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, the new movies. What made the Indoraptor and the other raptors that they created so scary was because it killed for fun. It killed for sport. That's what made it so evil and scary. And animals don't do that. Humans, because we do have free will, because I'm a compatibilist, so I believe determinism and free will are possible at the same time. Because we do have free will, that automatically puts into play a set of moralities, because we have the consciousness, the conscious choice to act right or wrong or good or evil. Some people kill for sport. Others kill in self-defense. I would argue killing an animal for sport is still morally wrong, but hunting an animal to eat is not morally wrong. That's my opinion. Not everybody agrees with that. some people kill animals for sport and, you know, they do that for fun. I consider that morally wrong. But that's just me. And of course there are degrees as well, right? So we have that too to consider.
So, if God does not exist, why think that we have any moral obligations to do anything? Who or what imposes these moral duties upon?
The ashes in your souls is your names blotted out of the book of life. Did Wesley just say we were taken off of the nice list and put on the naughty list? Oh no.
Upon us. Where did they come from? It's very hard to see why they would be anything more than a subjective impression ingrained into us by societal and parental conditioning. On the atheistic view, certain actions, such as incest or rape, may not be biologically and socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development have become taboo.
Oh yeah, and then also I wanted to mention that some more smarter, more intelligent animals do have some type of morality. Like dolphins can get raped, and you can see them feeling like emotions afterwards. Sorry, that's not the best description, but like elephants feel grief, and dolphins will like plan, they will like have gang rapes and shit like that. So, and dolphins are very, very intelligent animals. So some animals can act this way, but because we again use our brains more than any other life form on this planet does, morality mostly applies to us. And I think that's one of the goals of evolution and the life force, the drive of the life force, is to just keep growing intellectually so we fully understand ourselves and where we come from, where life comes from. And that's some kind of key to something, I guess. The key to life, right? Like understanding it all. That's just an idea I have, but
they go against the social contract that Shelly has imagined. But that does absolutely nothing to show that rape and incest is really wrong. Such behavior goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. On the atheistic view, the rapist who flouts the herd morality or the social contract is doing nothing more serious than acting unfashionably, like the man who flouts etiquette by belching loudly at the dinner table. If there is no moral lawgiver, then there is no objective moral law which we must obey. It's all a matter of social convention on a par with rules of etiquette. Thirdly, if God does not exist, then there is no basis for moral accountability. Traditionally, it's been held that God holds all persons morally accountable for their actions. Despite the inequities of this life, in the end, the scales of God's justice will be balanced. And thus, the moral choices that we make in this life have an eternal significance. But if God...
I'm not, trust me, I know that I know that not all Christians are Looney Toonies like this. There are some Looney Toony atheists out there too, so don't worry. If you want me to mute him for the rest of the stream, I can do that. I'm not sure if you guys find it entertaining, but if you guys are finding it annoying, I can mute him because it seems like he's just repeating himself now anyway, so yeah.
God does not exist. What basis remains for moral accountability. Even if there were objective duties and values under atheism,
No, you
they
are,
seem to be
Wesley.
irrelevant because there's no moral
are.
accountability. If life ends at the grave, then ultimately it makes no difference whether you live as a Stalin or as a Mother Teresa. As the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky rightly said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Given the finality of death, it really does not matter.
The secret's up. He's my bot. I put him in chat to do this, to troll you all. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. That is not true at all.
How
Let me
you
go
live.
back because I'm getting
Death,
distracted.
then all things, he rightly said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Given the finality of death, it really does not matter how you live.
Hold on, let me repeat what he said just there again because I think this is important.
As a Stalin or as a Mother Teresa. As the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky rightly said, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. Given the finality of death, it really does not matter how you live. The state torturers in Soviet prisons understood this all too well. Richard Wurmbrandt reports, the cruelty of atheism is hard to believe when man has no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil. There is no reason to be human. There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in man. The communist torturers often said, there is no God, no hereafter, no punishment for evil. We can do what we wish. I have heard one torturer even say, I thank God in whom I don't believe that I have lived to this hour when I can express all the evil in my heart. He expressed it in unbelievable brutality and torture inflicted on prisoners. Given the finality of death, it really doesn't matter how you live. So, what do you say?
Okay, so I understand what he's saying. This is why some people believe in karma. This is why some people like to believe in God, because there's some kind of reward for the way you live.
Wilderness resets in 3 days.
I just don't know if how do I word this? I don't know if the incentive of having a reward, again, is the best way to push true morality, or if it even really equates to true morality, because it's acting moral for the sake of a selfish reason, not for the sake of the greater good of just everyone. You're acting morally for a selfish reason, for a reward at the end of your life, rather than acting good because it is what is good. In fact, good. I also don't know if this incentive that that some religions believe in is a strong enough incentive, or if there's enough evidence to ensure the incentive exists for, like, to compel people to act morally when they otherwise wouldn't. So people who are going to act immoral already probably don't really care about heaven and hell. I don't know if it would sway them one way or another. But something that might sway them, might, just might, it might not, but it might, is what will happen to them while they are currently living their life here on Earth. So, like a strong criminal justice system, having, de-incentivizing somebody from acting immorally by punishing them, making sure there are consequences for acting immoral. And these things we can prove and we can show do actually happen and will actually happen to you if you do this, if you act this way and get caught, of course. So yeah, that's kind of my argument for that. Be mindful that in a Christian view, God's law is written on everyone's heart. So even though he is presupposing an atheist position with nihilism, we know many won't fall that deep. He is describing nihilism, the end of it. In a Christian view, God's law is written on everyone's heart, so even though he is presupposing an atheist position with nihilism, we know many won't fall that deep. Okay, so you're saying that even though an atheist doesn't believe in God, many aren't going to act like nihilistic just because they don't have God. Which William Lane, if I'm understanding you correct, and that is what you're trying to say, William Lane Craig did say in his intro that he's not trying to make an argument that in order to act morally you need to believe in God. He did say we understand that you don't need to believe in God to act morally, but again, the debate is about, is God necessary for morals to exist, for morality to exist? And when you look at it from that point, I can almost understand his argument based on just solely on the definition of the word objectivity. Because for something to be objective, truly objective, it needs to be based in fact and not feelings, quite literally. So the only problem with that is that God is not a fact. So you would need God to be factual and factually proven to have given a set of moral standards. And then you could say morals are objective. But because we can't prove God, I think it's fair to say morals can be objective because it is a fact that murdering somebody takes away somebody's life, and this is of great detriment to somebody. It also, hurts our society. It's not beneficial in any way, so I would say that's just an objective fact that murder is morally wrong. Yeah, the existence of God is a whole other can of words. Yeah, I'm just saying that's just like where my argument lies right now.
Say to someone who concludes that we may as well just live as we please out of pure self-interest. You might say it's in your best self-interest to adopt a moral lifestyle, but clearly that's not always true. We all know situations where self-interest runs smack dab in the face of morality. Moreover, if you're sufficiently powerful, like a...
The other thing I was going to say was, in the debate we watched previously on my channel between William Lane Craig, this guy talking right now, and it was Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss. They talked about this group of people that ended up killing off another group of people because God commanded them to. So they believed that God commanded them to kill off this whole group of people. And because it was a command from God, it was okay to do. And William Lane Craig was kind of defending that. So that's where we have some trouble too. And that goes back to my whole point earlier when I was saying religion, like morals based off religion, can be hard to reason with sometimes when the reasoning is solely a religious belief or just a belief system in general. So there's that as well.
Ferdinand Marcos or a Papa Doc Duvalier or even a Donald Trump, then one can pretty much ignore the dictates of conscience and safely live in self-indulgence. Historian Stuart C. Easton.
Did he just diss Donald Trump there real quick? Ooh. You guys are in trouble. No, just kidding.
Sums it up well when he writes, "There is no objective reason why man should be moral unless morality pays off in his social life."
That was like one of my favorite parts of the debate between Trump and Biden was when Biden said in his like super old man voice, he was like, "You have the morals of an alley cat." I don't know, it was just really funny. He was like, you have the morals of an alley cat.
Or makes him feel good. There is no objective reason why man should do anything save for the pleasure it affords him. To believe, then, that God does not exist and that there is thus no moral accountability would be quite literally demoralizing. For then we'd have to accept that our moral choices are ultimately insignificant, since both our fate and that of the universe will be the same regardless of what we do. By demoralization, I mean a deterioration of moral motivation. It's hard to do the right thing when that means sacrificing your self-interest or to resist temptation when desire is strong. And the belief that ultimately it doesn't matter what you choose or what you do is apt to sap one's moral strength.
That's not true, though. Just because you don't believe in an afterlife doesn't mean that your actions, the actions that you do won't make a difference in the world. It might not make a difference on what happens when you die, but from an atheistic belief, but we all do understand that our actions have consequences, and something like the butterfly effect, for example. We do make a difference in the world whether or not an afterlife exists. So ultimately, your decisions do matter.
Yeah, they really have that.
And so undermine one's moral life. As Robert Adams observes, having to regard it as very likely that the history of the universe will not be good.
And in a couple of days, I just want to put this out there now. I'm going to be doing a morality part 2, and we're going to be watching a different video. It's going to be a little less God involved, I think. I don't know, I haven't watched it, but instead of the debate being, is God necessary for morality, the debate is morality subjective or objective? So that might involve some theology stuff too. But that will be my next stream.
Good, on the whole, no matter what one does, seems apt to induce a cynical sense of futility about the moral life, undermining one's moral resolve and one's interest.
Oh, also, I don't know if this is too early to announce this yet, but I messaged Andrew Wilson, and with the debate proposal, and he agreed to debate me. So, we haven't been able to choose a date yet because the one date that he has available, I'm not available. I have prior plans with a very old and dear friend of mine who I haven't seen in years, and she's also very busy. So this is kind of the one day we are able to finally get together after years. And then after that, Andrew's going to be in Miami. So, but he said we'll work something out. So stay tuned for a Ghosty versus Andrew Wilson debate coming up soon, which should be very interesting. I'm probably biting off too much than I can chew, but I'm going for it, guys. I don't give a fuck around here. Clearly. No, but it should be fun. So I'm going to do my best and try very hard and I'm taking it very seriously. So we'll see what happens. The topic is the legality of porn. So I'm arguing that porn is better off remaining legal. He's going to argue why porn should be illegal, or why porn would be better off illegal, and also the semantics of sex work. Like, are OnlyFans models prostitutes, and stuff like that. So yeah. So it should be interesting. When I get a date, I will definitely let you guys know. And I'm pretty familiar with Andrew's position. I watched his recent debate on whatever about this topic. I've seen him talk about it before as well. So if you have any pointers about his position, you can let me know, though. It won't hurt.
In moral considerations, the absence of moral accountability from the philosophy of atheism thus makes an ethic of compassion and self-sacrifice a hollow abstraction. In sum, I think it's plausible that without God, there are no objective moral values, moral duties, or moral accountability. God is therefore vitally necessary to morality. Now, as I said, this is a conclusion which is accepted by a great many atheist philosophers, such as Nietzsche, Russell, and Sartre. Though the conclusion is a painful one, these thinkers believe that honesty compels them to face it squarely. The challenge confronting the atheist philosopher, who continues to cling to objective moral values and duties after letting go of God, is, I think, threefold. First, to explain what is the basis for objective moral values on atheism. In particular, what is the basis for the intrinsic value of human beings? Second, to explain what is the source of objective moral duties on atheism. What makes certain acts obligatory or forbidden if there is no moral lawgiver to command or prohibit them? Why is it wrong to harm other members of our species, to inflict harm upon others? Thirdly, to explain how on atheism ultimate moral accountability exists, or alternatively, to explain why it is not necessary to morality. These questions must, I think, be addressed if one is to maintain that God is not necessary to morality.
Oh, sorry. I was talking about William Lane Craig's intro when he was still doing his intro. So now they're going to have a questioning, kind of like back and forth. Without Lies says purpose. Only the creator can give his creation purpose. No one can argue with that. Don't challenge me. Okay. Let's get into the fun part.
We'll now have 10 minutes
My ring
of
is-
questioning between Dr. Craig asking Dr. Kagan about his thoughts.
Well, obviously, a number of questions came up in my talk that would be pertinent to what you shared, Shelly. In your opening address, you said right or wrong depends upon the whether you hurt other people without justification. And when asked, are these really wrong, you answered yes. Why? Because it harms the victim. Now, I guess my difficulty is that I certainly agree that it's wrong to harm people, obviously, but it's hard for me to understand on a naturalistic worldview, such as I described, why on the worldview of naturalism, inflicting harm upon other members of our species is really wrong. It seems to me that this happens all the time among other animals, and so why is it wrong peculiarly for human beings to inflict harm on each other?
All right, so
Okay, so what I would say before I let him answer is, again, like, animals aren't inflicting harm on each other for sport or for fun. So when humans inflict harm on each other for sport and for fun, there's no greater purpose to it. Animals are inflicting harm on one another for the purpose of survival, for feeding their family. And also, they tend to do it in a very, it's not even like they're doing it on purpose, but just naturally, it often works out in a very, like, circle of life kind of way. Like, unless sometimes younger animals are the more vulnerable ones that animals attack, but they typically have mothers and the adults protecting those younglings. But lots of times the animals that end up getting eaten off by the predators are the slower ones that are already injured, or they're already older and they're weaker, so they're slower, and it's kind of just a circle of life. So animals, the way that, even when you think about dinosaurs with all their, the predator dinosaurs, with all their teeth and claws and scary contraptions, dinosaurs lived harmoniously on this planet for a very, very, very long time. And they were able to do that because they would pick off the weakest members, and they were typically the oldest members or the ones that were already ill or sick or injured. So it wasn't this, constant life of living in terror. I mean, you were always on alert and stuff like that, but dinosaurs were thriving, and not just the predators, but the herbivores and stuff like that too. And we see that today too. Like when we look at, there's a couple of lion packs, and then there's how many wildebeest or how many antelope and stuff like that. So, of course, I've never seen a dinosaur eat another dinosaur, but I do know about the numbers of dinosaurs and how they lived.
Same. No way. Bro, I didn't even know I got one. I didn't even know how rare it was, but like,
Okay, but we can use it for today too. We can see it in today's prey and predators as well. But there is research. I mean, we can see pre-meteor times how many of what kind of dinosaur there were and which ones were thriving and which ones weren't. So there is science that can show that by digging up bones and stuff like that. We can see which ones lived and which ones didn't. And we know how long they lived on the planet successfully for a very, very, very long time, harmoniously together. So, but yeah. But anyways, it is an equivalent to today's world anyways, so.
And Leah, right?
Um,
Really?
I don't know if there's a big level of conjecture, like as far as like
Bro, if it wasn't for...
how they looked, I guess. Yeah, we don't know what they looked like exactly.
Those jaws.
But we can see what they, I think we can even tell what they ate and stuff like that based on just their fossils.
Well, let's start with that. Suppose that my 3-year-old nephew walks into your house, takes some book off your shelf, and tears the pages out. He hasn't done anything wrong, or 3-year-old's probably old enough he has done something wrong. Make him a year and a half, he hasn't done anything wrong. If I go into your house, tear some pages out of your book, I've done something wrong. What's the difference? Well, I'm capable of appreciating reasons for respecting your property that my 1.5-year-old, this is hypothetical 1.5-year-old nephew, doesn't have the capacity, right? There are differences between people that allow me and you to think about our behavior.
Well, we've never looked at dinosaurs, so that would be using the scientific method. But nonetheless, okay, if you don't want me to use dinosaurs, fine, but that's how predators and prey still act today. They pick off the weakest members, they pick off the sick members, and the ones who are already injured and stuff like that. It's not like this violent, life where like lions are constantly inflicting harm. In fact, lions probably have harder survival than the prey do. Prey probably thrive a lot more. It is actually like pretty hard to hunt a lot of times. A lot of times their hunts are not successful and they starve to death. That's one of the main killers of cheetahs is starvation right now. Yeah, I know, because not all of them believe in dinosaurs, but there is science for this. I'm just,
To evaluate our behaviors to see whether or not they're legitimate.
And also, just the fact, well, I guess if you don't believe in dinosaurs, you don't believe in dinosaurs, but just, I mean, it is fact that they were on this planet for longer than we've been on the planet, by far longer. So, obviously, they were living harmoniously and sanctimoniously? Anyways, harmoniously in a balance for a very, very long time. I can't put a number on it, but a super long time. Longer than us.
Reasons for behaving as we do. Creatures that don't have that capacity. It's precisely because they lack that capacity that makes no sense that the notion of right and wrong behavior gets no purchase. Lions can't reflect upon their behavior, so when they do it, it's not wrong. If you or I were to engage in that behavior, we can reflect upon that. We can recognize the reasons for not behaving that way. So I think the distinction is a fairly straightforward one, not a deep mystery or a hard challenge for the naturalist to respond to.
Okay, I think that's a good answer for why we wouldn't regard animals as moral agents who would be culpable for their acts. But it seems to me that at best that answer would go to show that rationality, or the ability to reflect rationally on things, is a necessary condition for moral behavior, but I don't see that that's a sufficient condition for moral behavior. It's still not clear to me why it would be wrong for creatures who have considerably complex neurological systems to inflict harm on each other on a naturalistic worldview in the struggle for survival.
Okay, so the question you asked initially was, how can I explain why it's wrong for me to murder when it's not wrong for lions to murder? And to answer that question, all it takes is for me to point out a relevant difference between us, and you've just, I think, said, yeah, all right, so I managed to do that. If we now shift to the question, so what does it take for wrongness to enter the world above and beyond rationality? I think the answer might well be, actually, once we achieve a certain level of rationality, nothing more is taken. Nothing more is needed. The reason it's objectively wrong for me to engage in murder is precisely because there is a reason for me not to do it, a reason that I'm capable of recognizing. And if you ask, well, what more does it take? The answer is, well, those are the basic ingredients right there. We can refine it. I mean, we can put a little icing on it if we'd like to make it. But in terms of the essentials, that's it. What there's reason for me to do depends on what kind of creature I am. Once I become the kind of creature in the evolutionary, process, once creatures evolve that are capable of stepping back from their actions, capable of reflecting about whether or not their behavior makes sense, whether it conforms to standards that they are themselves prepared to endorse, at that point the machinery is in place. And at that point there are reasons for me to behave in certain ways and to avoid other kinds of behavior. And if you ask, but what makes that wrong?
I'm still not clear as to why these beings suddenly achieve intrinsic moral worth in virtue of having these complex nervous systems that enables them to have self-reflection and so forth.
If you put it as complex nervous systems, it sounds pretty deflationary.
Right.
What's so special about having a complex nervous system? But of course, that complex nervous system allows you to do calculus. It allows you to do astrophysics. It allows you to write poetry. It allows you to fall in love. Put under that description, you ask, what's so special about humans from a naturalistic perspective? I'm at a loss to know how to answer that question. If you don't see why we'd be special and different from everything else in creation, that because we can do poetry, we can write a novel, we can think philosophical thoughts, we can do calculus, and we can think about the morality of our behavior, I don't know what kind of answer could possibly satisfy you at that point.
Well, obviously, the kind of answer that I offered, but
but can I ask just to follow up on that? Because I mean, I'm tempted to say I could play this game, and that's unfair, because of course it's not a game. But I could pose the same kinds of questions to you. Perhaps I will. In 10 minutes, I could say, look, all right. So God says, you guys are really, really special.
Right.
So, how does his saying it make us really special? But you see, he gave us a soul. How does our having a soul make us special? Whatever answer you give, you could always say, with regard to that, what's so special about that? At a certain point, you're just going to have to say, you know what? These features really do seem to me to be special. Insofar as it seems to me that our ability to communicate, to reflect, to love, to be creative, and consequently to shape our behavior with an eye towards how we're interacting with one another, these things strike me as remarkable ways in which we're special.
I think that they strike all of us that way, and that's the difficulty, perhaps, I think, in showing what I'm attempting.
I think something, like one problem I have with theists is they don't give credit to humans. They have to accredit all of this complexity and just like complexity of our lives to and even science. I mean, nature, the complexity and diversity of nature, the beauty of life, they have to accredit it to this God instead of just us, ourselves, and nature, science. Instead of a credit, they have to come up with something else to give credit to, instead of, where I believe, giving credit where it's due, like to ourselves. We made it here. Well, we did this. We evolved. We survived. With the help of the way nature works, the way physics works, the way biology works. And we don't understand why it works like that. I gotta go. Great stream. Come join my video that is premiering right now after you finish here. Oh yeah, I'll check it out. Thanks. I probably won't be here for too much longer. Thanks for stopping by. I'll check out your video though for sure. Have a good night. But yeah, I think I just have a problem with that, is like, there's often credit, I don't know, like credit isn't given
Nobody else is gonna do that to you but pure.
to where it's due. That's not how it's supposed to be worded. I lost my train of thought. But yeah, it's the credit isn't given to where I think it's due.
To show is that we all do, I think, intuitively value one another. We value persons. We value poetry, creativity, and all of these things. I think we all agree that these are goods.
Well, for a Christian, appealing to our nature is the root of sin, and the metaphysical of thought, mind, and reason is God and the Spirit.
What happened to fucking what's his name?
Why though? Why would appealing to our nature be sinful?
Shit. The guy that was running the
Other than for the fact that you believe in a God. But like, what, like, practical reason would it be sinful to accredit the beauty of life and what is to be to nature, where it comes from?
Fuck that. I literally wake up for work at 9:30 to log in at 9:30.
Does oh, happy 1234 everyone. What about appealing to our nature is desire though? What is that desire? Couldn't I say the same thing, like a desire in God is a desire? I feel like that just feels so wrong to me, to say that appealing to our nature is sinful when that's our nature. It's literally our nature, what we come from, what we are. That it feels so wrong to say that that's sinful to me. But I guess that's the difference between our beliefs.
The question is, though, on a naturalistic view, why think that these things are goods? It seems to me that you emphasize in your own book, On the Limits of Morality, the importance of having explanations and not cutting off the search for explanations too soon. And I wonder if you're not cutting off the search for explanations too soon.
Because the soul and the flesh are two separate entities. Flesh is our nature, our soul, the spirit. Oh, flesh is our nature, our soul is a spirit. I just see both of those as nature. I just see both of those as natural things. I don't separate them. I think our body, our minds are a part of our bodies, and our bodies control our minds.
Bro, we fucking dominated. Oh, it was so much fun.
By simply saying, well, I'm just going to regard persons as intrinsically valuable,
exactly.
but without any kind of
where
further
our
grounding
worldview
for
is
that.
Well, of course, I haven't claimed there is no further grounding for that. I gave you a sketch
of course, no
of
one's
the
right or wrong,
contractarian
so-
thought. Your attitude was, I don't find that a very compelling story. It doesn't seem to me to be the kind of thing that constitutes an adequate grounding. I suppose these things are in the eyes of the beholder, and everybody here is entitled to decide for themselves what kind of answers will be satisfactory or not.
Let me ask you a different question then.
One more.
Oh, okay. Are you a determinist?
Yes.
And yet you still think that love is significant and human choices are
Yes,
morally significant even though they're determined?
So to give a piece of jargon to the audience that Bill will be familiar with, I'm a compatibilist. That is to say, I believe that one can combine determinism and free will. So absent free will, humans would lack the significance that we clearly have. But I believe that's compatible with determinism. Actually, am I a determinist? Who knows what quantum mechanics teaches us about whether or not determinism is true, but at least I believe that determinism could be true without in any way threatening my conviction that humans are special.
Did you have a follow-up on that one?
Well,
I think you did.
Only to say that it just seems to me to rob moral choices of any sort of significance if we're determined to do it by the antecedent physical causes that lead up to the point of choosing and then cause our brains to react one way rather than another. I can't see how.
I just don't know why that wouldn't be special. Like, we're all living the way that we are, and we all can feel like life is beautiful and special and fall in love and feel grief and friendships and happiness and all these things. We can all find meaning and purpose within our lives, even while understanding why we feel those things. I don't think figuring out the reason for why we feel those ways diminishes the feelings at all. They're still real. It's in fact, figuring out why we feel that way makes it even more real. Understanding it, it makes it more real. And I don't find that to diminish the beauty of life. I think this was Lawrence Krauss too, and I don't know who he quoted, but he said, seeing a rainbow is beautiful, and then once you figure out why a rainbow happens, doesn't make it any less beautiful, it makes it more beautiful. So that's kind of how I thought that was like a really significant quote to communicate like my feelings about this.
That could have any more moral significance than a tree growing a branch at a certain point in its development.
Because you're an incompatibilist. You don't believe determinism and free will. So this is a debate for another night. I mean, it's not that I think the truth of compatibilism is at all self-evident.
Can you just explain what that term means?
Compatibilism is the view that there's no logical inconsistency between belief in determinism on the one hand and the existence of free will on the other. They're compatible.
Well, that's a little bit misleading, though. I mean, you need to explain what you mean by free will in that case, if everything's determined.
What I was trying to do is simply give a quick definition. Remember, I said that this is a very, as you know, it's a very, very complicated question. We would basically hijack the entire rest of the evening to start trying to...
I'm unclear on the terms myself.
Right. So my thought was just that the plausibility of the compatibilist view that I hold, I don't take to be self-evident. I believe it takes philosophical argumentation for it. I completely agree that those drawn to incompatibilism, those drawn to the view that you can't have both deterministic physical laws and robust free will think if naturalism is true, and the best science teaches us that determinism is true, itself a controversial question whether that's the best interpretation of our best science, then we'll lack free will. And then if free will is necessary for having special value, then we'll lack special value. But there's a lot of premises before we get to the conclusion that naturalism doesn't have space for this special value. And I reject several of those premises, which is why I'm not feeling uncomfortable by the challenge that Bill's raising.
Well, let's turn the table, and now you'll ask Bill some questions.
All right. So one of the things that you said in your opening remarks, well, you quoted several people. I think there was a long quote from Michael Roos saying something like, if naturalism is true, if theism is false, then ethics is illusory, deeper meaning is illusory. That's not an exact quote, but I think those phrases were there. And I found that an interesting slide, or so it seemed to me. The move from ethics is illusory to deeper meaning is illusory. I think I want to concede that in the way you mean deeper meaning, I don't believe in deeper meaning. Because I think when you talk that way, you think for there to, not that I have any trouble talking about meaning or even deep meaning, but when you talk that way, I think you're thinking it's got to be meaning on a cosmic scale. That's where some of the points about accountability come in as well.
Yes.
So, fine, I believe that humans are just creatures that evolved on this tiny little speck of dust. But I don't see how the denial of deeper meaning should give me any reason to think, therefore I'm committed to ethics as illusory. So perhaps you could explain that.
Where that came in, I think, was with respect to moral accountability. And and also with regard to the significance of human beings. It seemed to me that on a naturalistic worldview, everything is ultimately destined to destruction in the heat death of the universe. As the universe expands, it grows colder and colder as its energy is used up. And eventually all the stars will burn out. All matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no life, no heat, no light, only the corpses of dead stars and galaxies expanding into endless darkness. And in light of that end, it's hard for me to understand how our moral choices have any sort of significance. There's no moral accountability. The universe is neither better nor worse for what we do.
I think this is a good example of why living in the present is so important. So many people are worried about the future, and so many people are worried about the past. So many people live in the future, and many people live in the past. So a good friend of mine once told me that anxiety is living for the future, and depression is living in the past. And that made a lot of sense to me. And something that I found very helpful and beneficial for my life was learning how to live in the present, because I'm someone who struggled with both anxiety and depression. And I do still a little bit, but it's so much better than what it used to be. And when you're having anxiety, you're worried about what is going to happen, what will happen. You're worried about situations that haven't even happened yet, or that potentially don't even, that have the potential to never even happen at all. And then when you're depressed, you're living in the past. You're worried about things that happened before, and it's weighing you down, and you just keep thinking about things that have happened and how it's, still affecting you. And something I just found really helpful sometimes is when I'm feeling these ways is being super present and taking a moment and being like, what is happening right now that I need to worry about? I'm safe. I'm okay. I have people I love that love me. I have this, whatever. You know, I'm inside a nice warm house or something, or like I'm not in jail currently, like whatever it is that's comforting. You just like live in the present. And I think a lot of this talk about, well, our decisions ultimately have no like super cosmological effect. First of all, we don't know that.
Dog shit.
We do not know that.
Where's that?
And second of all,
Dog shit.
if for anything, they matter now. They matter for the now. And that's what should matter most, is making a difference now and trying to make the best difference for the future. But ultimately, like, it could be a little freeing knowing that,
I am not doing
I don't know, like, I don't know. I guess some people would find it kind of,
It looks so goofy.
um,
I mean, I
was
get it, but, like,
morbid
it
to
shouldn't
think
the whole
that
game just
ultimately
be-
nothing would matter.
Plus,
But
it's pretty
if something matters at one point, I don't think that means that it never mattered. So that's kind of what I'm trying to say. And if it matters now, then it matters ultimately. And that's kind of what I'm coming from.
do, that ultimately there isn't, our moral lives become vacuous because they don't have that kind of cosmic significance.
I still need to have you explain that for me better, because, again, it seems to me it's one thing to say it lacks eternal, cosmic, everlasting significance. It's another thing to say it lacks significance. In fact, to give one of your examples, you talked about, again, I don't remember the source of this quote, but the torturers, was it Nazi torturers?
Right, yeah.
And you say, you know, if theism isn't true, then it doesn't really matter. This strikes me as, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's going to sound rude, but it strikes me as an outrageous thing to suggest. It doesn't really matter? Surely it matters to the torture victims whether they're being tortured. It doesn't require that this makes some cosmic difference to the eternal significance of the universe for it to matter whether a human being is tortured. It matters to them, it matters to their family, it matters to us. So again, how do you move from the lack of eternal significance to the thought that if it doesn't have eternal significance, it can't have any significance?
Because the victim, it obviously matters to him in the sense that he's in pain and agony, but ultimately it doesn't matter that he was ever in pain and in agony. The whole thing just degenerates into utter meaninglessness and insignificance. I don't mean to suggest that the torture didn't do a bad thing to this person, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It all ends up the same.
Yes, but it all ending up the same isn't the same thing as, and so it doesn't matter what happens until we get there. And when I say, and it matters what the path is before we get to the end point, I don't merely mean subjectively it matters, it appears to matter, it matters to them, but it doesn't really matter.
Well, and that's what it seems to me. It just matters subjectively.
But again, I just want to say, I don't understand how we get from, if it doesn't objectively matter to the universe, or doesn't objectively matter on a cosmic scale, how do we get from that to, so it doesn't objectively matter at all?
Well, remember...
So it's not a point about the nature of objective. It's the question is, why should we think objective value must be on the cosmic scale or not there?
Right, like, think about just, like, so many people, average people, they're not going to quite literally change history.
We just got them.
I wouldn't take away their significance because they didn't make a significant impact on overall human history and humanity in the world. I still think a teacher making making a difference in one child's life is significant. That child will go on and take that and made a difference in their life, and then they'll make a difference. It's like, again, like the butterfly effect. I just see value in our independent lives as they are currently. So
There at all.
Okay, now let's remember the argument. This concern arose in the third point about moral accountability. This wasn't in the first 2 points about objective moral values and duties. What I said was, with regard to the third point, even if objective moral values and duties exist, they become irrelevant because they're inconsequential. So my third point about moral accountability was simply to say, on atheism, even if there are objective right and wrong and good and evil, there's no moral accountability, and so one might as well just live as he pleases. And
might as well. If by might as well means there's no reason to live one way versus the other unless it makes a difference on the cosmic scale, it just seems to me that the same questions being, to my ears, begged yet again. It matters perfectly. There's an objective, categorical reason, not a matter of opinion. There's a fact of the matter about the compelling, overriding reason that you are irrational to disregard, even though, in terms of the heat death of the universe, it won't stop it. But for all that, there's an objective reason not to behave this way.
Yeah, that would be to say you have an objective moral duty. And for the third point, I was willing to grant that. But the question here is the deeper question about why adopt the moral point of view. And that can't be a moral answer because you're asking the question, why adopt the moral point of view? I think the concern that I have in this third point is that on
What's the answer that you believe you get as a theist?
Let me explain. I think on the third point, that what I'm trying to say there is that on atheism or naturalism, that prudential value and moral value are on a collision course with each other. That what it's prudent for me to do is often in contrast or in conflict with what's moral for me to do. And prudence would seem to trump morality in terms of one's self-interest in virtue of the fact that it makes no difference how you choose. But on theism, where there is moral accountability, you can consistently make choices that go against your self-interest and sacrifice self-interest and prudence for the sake of the moral value and moral duty.
Because precisely you'll get it back in the end, and so it's not really in the long term a self-sacrifice at all. That's the thought, yes?
Well, that wasn't what that wouldn't be the way I'd put it. It's not that...
But that is the reason that you think you can resolve the conflict between prudence and and morality, because God makes it be the case that unless you act morally, your self-interest won't actually be furthered. That's how
He said himself, because there's some greater reward. When he was quoting those prisoners, those Russian terrorist prisoners or whatever, torturers, he was saying, it's so harmful if there's no, I can't think the exact quote, but he was also essentially saying that it's harmful to humanity if we don't have a belief that there is some kind of like existential reward at the end of life. Because then you can just do whatever you want and it doesn't matter. There's no consequence or reward for any of it.
the solution
yes,
is...
that's right. That they'll be in harmony with each other ultimately.
So you're completely right. I don't believe they're in harmony.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I believe the only rational thing to do is to act prudently. On the contrary, I believe there's greater reason. This should be a form of a question, like Jeopardy. Put this in a form of question, Shelly.
Yeah.
why not believe that
It's funny, he said Jeopardy.
moral reasons outweigh prudential reasons?
And I said
the mere fact that there's a conflict doesn't commit the naturalist to the claim that the prudential ones are the weightier ones.
All right, but there is that conflict, and for many people, I think, as I said, this can have a demoralizing effect upon a person because ultimately his moral choices make no difference either for himself or for the good of the universe. And I suspect that this will be demoralizing in the way that Adams suggested it would.
No doubt for some people it will be, but of course for some people there's a different kind of demoralizing that takes place with the belief in theism, isn't there? I mean, if we're just going to talk about what are some possible psychological effects, some people will act morally not out of the recognition of the objective values, but merely in hopes of getting into heaven and avoiding hell. There's something morally off about that as well. And
Yeah, I agree.
so both sides face certain empirical questions about, certain people may misread the implications of the view. That strikes me as a standoff at best.
I don't know. I'm not sure that the person who acts in self-interest has misread the implications of the atheistic worldview.
That's because you've yet again assumed that if we're naturalists, we must assume that prudence, either there are no moral reasons at all, or if there are, they're inferior in strength to prudential reasons. That doesn't seem to me to follow from naturalism at all. If we had more time, obviously we can only begin to scratch the surface of this debate. If we had more time, I'd lay upon you my elaborate theory of the nature of practical reasoning, according to which prudential reasons are less significant than moral reasons.
Well,
this is a view that I think is completely compatible with naturalism.
Perhaps we can get it.
Little imaginary dictator, I suppose, has acted wrongly and as such
Don't know why the
deserves
video did
punishment. So how can we justify the punishment? In terms of the rules of the social contract. What do? We agree in the contract that if people break the contract, they'll be subject to penalty.
What if he doesn't want to sign the contract?
So look,
He's outside the contract, so he's not bound by it.
well, the question is not what does any given person in fact agree to. That's why I talked about what we would agree to insofar as we're imagining ourselves as being perfectly rational. As a perfectly rational being, that is to say, if you imagined a kind of souped up, cleaned up version of the dictator, it would be just as reasonable for him to sign the contract as for the rest of us. It's neither here nor there that he doesn't accept morality. He's still bound by it. We're all bound by it precisely because it would be reasonable for all of us to agree to its terms.
Dr. Kagan, you say that human reason leads to morality.
Dr. Craig.
Dr. Craig, I'm sorry. Wrong pile. Okay, I got myself confused. Okay. Dr.
How did
Craig,
he fuck
do
that
you
up?
think
Oh my
that
God.
without God, there is no free will?
Yes, I guess I would say that, because it would seem to me that if God doesn't exist, then human beings are just material objects, and that what we call free choices are just the results of electrochemical reactions in our nervous system, and that therefore they're not genuinely free. So that was why I said one of the implications of naturalism is physicalism, and as a result determinism. And this seems to me to be just a clear reason for thinking that our moral choices are ultimately illusory and insignificant, because they're like having a toothache, or like having hair grow. There is no sense in which a personal agent freely chooses between A and not A and making a moral decision. So I guess I would say that.
Shelly, it seems like there are...
And I'm not unempathetic to that, or sympathetic to that view. And I agree. I understand why people feel that way. And I think that's a good argument for free will and such. But yeah, I'm just gonna say that.
A lot of people are hung up on the Nazis.
Yeah. They're bad. They're objectively bad. Let's be clear about that.
But it's hard for them to, it seems like, just based on the questions, it's hard for people to understand how we can objectively say they're bad when, if they won, would they still be bad? If they were the ones kind of running the world and dictating morality, would they still be objectively bad in your view?
Yes, the suggestion is not that it's a matter of a popularity poll, or who wins the Second World War, or which way history goes. It's a thought experiment. The social contract is a thought experiment, and you ask yourself, what are reasonable terms to govern our behaviors with one another? And in trying to set up that thought experiment, you want to set certain background conditions. One background condition I mentioned was the veil of ignorance. You want to make sure you don't know whether you're one of the people who are, in fact, the winners in society or the losers in society. One of the conditions is you want to imagine the bargainers are rational, because you don't want the rules that emerge to be an artifact of some mistake in reasoning.
So-
It's neither here nor there what the
Yeah, like if people are acting in accordance with a certain way, like not acting in selfishness, complete selfishness, being reasonable, being what was the other thing he just said? The first thing he said. But there's a logical way of acting that can determine morals, because it gives us it allows for the best outcome, I guess, for everybody in a reasonable way. I don't know. I'm not saying that the best way possible. I'm getting a little tired, but
the Nazis thought was acceptable. The question is just what, in fact, would be the terms of a contract agreed upon by perfectly rational bargainers. And the terms of those contracts, I think if we had more time, we could proceed to lay out the argument, are such that there'd be a prohibition against killing innocent people, which, of course, is exactly what the Nazis did. So what the Nazis did was violate the terms of the contract, and so, in fact, they were immoral whether or not they see it.
and you could argue it is why they lost. Yeah, no problem. I'm gonna end here soon. I might even end it now anyways, and then because it's just like the Q&A section, and I am gonna finish well, maybe I'll finish this video when I do morality part 2, but I'm gonna do another stream on morality, but we'll be watching a different video. Maybe I'll consider finishing this video if I think it's worth it. But yeah, I'm gonna end soon anyways, and then in a couple days I'll be talking about another morality video where they're talking about subjectivity of morality. Is it objective? Is it subjective? But yeah, thanks for being here though. I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, for sure. So
Dude, they did.
yeah,
Right?
I will have that set up. My okay, awesome. Yeah, for my next one, I'll do an open panel for it for sure. That's a good idea. Awesome. All right, I will see you then. I might watch a couple more minutes of this and then end the stream.
Dr. Craig, there seems to be an issue with this idea of objective good, that there have been numerous crimes in the history of humanity perpetrated on, in the name of religion.
Right.
Nay.
Right. How do you grapple with that issue?
I'd like to use religious examples of atrocities to help communicate to students the difference between objective good and objective evil. If you say that there is no objective moral value or moral duties, then you have to say things like this, that the Spanish Inquisition, which sent thousands of Jews to their deaths, was really morally indifferent. That the Crusades, which enlisted children to send off to war and then were ultimately sold into slavery, was a morally indifferent act. That religious intolerance is morally fine. So I think that these examples help to underscore the fact that there really are objective moral values and duties that we recognize when we think about these kinds of situations. So remember, the argument isn't that you have to believe in God in order to be moral. That's not the argument. The argument is that you need to have God as an objective, transcendent standard for moral value that moves beyond simple human conventions or societal mores.
But why do we stray so much? Why do these things
Oh,
happen
well.
so often in the name of God?
Right. If you would ask me that as a Christian philosopher, I would begin to talk about Christian doctrine of sin, that we're morally fallen persons, that we're corrupted, and therefore in desperate need of God's moral cleansing and forgiveness and rehabilitation in our lives, and that these moral issues bring to the fore our desperate need of God as a moral healer and forgiver.
And Dr. Kagan, why do we violate the social contract so much, whether it's on Wall Street or whether it's in Nazi Germany?
I would talk about sin as well. I mean, the vocabulary of sin, though it finds its natural home in religion, isn't limited. I mean, we need a vocabulary to talk about. We need to face the fact that people are not perfectly moral. And it's no doubt some deep truth about our nature that we fail to live up to our moral obligations. You can put this fact in some metaphysical terms in terms of original sin. You can put this fact in naturalistic terms in terms of something about our evolutionary heritage and how we were evolved to favor our kin and our friends. There's going to be some explanation of it. Anybody who pretends that everything is well with the world is naive. The claim that there's objective morality is not, and that perfectly rational beings would agree to its terms and thereby ground from the basis of objective reality is not any kind of claim that we are perfectly rational, that we behave perfectly rationally. In trivial terms, this is a completely familiar fact. You're on a diet, and the piece of chocolate cake calls you from the refrigerator, right? So you know you shouldn't do it. You do it anyway. That's what people are like. Interesting question why that's so, but I take it there's no disagreement at all that it's so. And the naturalist, I think, is no more at a handicap in terms of offering explanations of that fact.
What about ways of preventing it? Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, are there ways of controlling, it's sort of instilling the social contract a little bit better?
Well, look, there are a variety of things that people need in order to become moral beings. One is moral education, a topic of tremendous significance, though, again, other than just gesturing its direction, it would take us way too long to say anything helpful about it. How children are brought up so as to have a regard for one another and to recognize that it isn't just a matter of whether you get caught. It isn't just a matter of whether you're going to get punished, but that this is another human being you're dealing with, and as such, you have to have respect for their interests. Moral education is crucially important. Moral community.
Just having natural empathy and understanding for others, I think, is like a huge essential that lots of people just lack. I feel like we're raised in such a way of like dog eat dog or every man for themselves in a very competitive way. Which competition is good and it's useful, but equally, I think, is useful community and understanding and empathy and teamwork, putting ourselves in another one's shoe and not acting selfishness all the time, acting selfishly, selflessly. That's it. Sorry, like I said, I'm getting tired. Acting selflessly, not acting selfishly. And again, understanding of others. And I think this is equally as important. You're right. I'll say empathy, sympathy. I think this is equally as important to be taught in especially young children, because they're sponges, as teaching them to be able to compete and look out for themselves. I think they are both equally important. And if we want to improve this world and improve our overall lifestyles and well-beings, we're gonna have to teach both. And I think right now we're being taught one more than the other because, I don't know, maybe blame capitalism or something like that. I think that's just the way it is right now. And I think we could use a little bit more of the empathy, community, and understanding.
is crucially important. And not to be naive at all, the state is crucially important. I mean, there's certainly one thing that Craig's theism provides him that I lack. He has a cosmic enforcer, which provides a kind of motivation that I can't appeal to. So I've got to hope I can assemble materials here on Earth. Although I can't resist taking one little, I'm not sure it's a pot shot, but at least it's a question about the accountability, which I take it as the thought that evildoers get punished and good doers get a heavenly reward, and so you don't get the bad guys getting into heaven. I'm not quite sure how to reconcile that with the belief that Jesus can provide, salvation.
Yeah.
It seems to me that is in tension with the notion of accountability we're trying to put forward.
Yeah, actually, this gets into really important questions of theology, because on the Christian view, it isn't the bad guys that go to hell. The bad guys get into heaven. The bad guys are the ones who recognize their sin, who turn to God in contrition and repentance and say, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. It's the self-righteous Pharisees who wind up in hell because they fancy they're so good they don't need God's forgiveness and cleansing. So on the Christian view, Christ actually is the one who bears the penalty and the payment for sin. The wrath of God from God's holy justice is poured out upon Christ so that I don't have to pay the penalty for my sins that I deserve, and I can be a beneficiary of his grace.
But that does seem then in tension with the notion of accountability that you were laying forward, where the thought was, unless my doing good has cosmic significance, if it turns out that I can do evil, and as long as I manage to recognize the saving power of Jesus, in time, this accountability stuff's not really there.
Well, I mean, no genuine Christian would think like that. What I was trying to communicate there, is that our moral lives really matter, that they make a difference. For me, the thought that everything perishes in the heat death of the universe, like Russell's credo, is so depressing, so awful that it just seems to put a question mark behind everything we do. All our accomplishments, all our deeds just seem so trivial in light of this cosmic doom.
Okay, but again, and I understand, I see why people feel that way. But again, to me, that just seems like people need a motive to act morally, or some kind of grandeur, greater purpose to act morally right. And they're looking for something to get out of it, rather than recognizing what your actions are doing now, what effects your actions have now on the people around you today, in the world you live in today, currently. I don't think that, just because one day I'm gonna die, we're all gonna die, and Earth won't be here anymore, that doesn't make my friendships that I have with people, my relationships, my family, any less valuable or important, or the happiness I feel. That doesn't diminish it at all. It's, again, people lack the ability to live in the present, and realize that the differences that their actions have today matter the most.
That awaits us all.
But not for me. It seems to me that
I just don't understand.
If I've saved somebody's life, I've done something significant. I've done something important. I've done something whose significance is not in any way threatened, diminished, reduced one iota by the fact that, whatever it is, 40 billion years from now, the sun will explode. It's neither here nor there. I've saved a human life. That's what matters. And the fact it doesn't have cosmic significance doesn't seem to me to undermine its significance.
I'd like to talk about animals.
Animals?
Yes. What about our relationship with animals? Do we have a moral obligation to treat animals well, or are they just totally separate from us in the grand scheme of things?
Is that a question for me?
It's for both of you.
You want to go first?
Well, I think that here, the Christian, the theist, has a tremendous advantage in terms of developing an environmental ethic and an ethic for the stewardship and care of animals. And it would be based not upon the fact that animals themselves are moral agents who have rights, because, as we've said, not being rational beings, they aren't aren't moral agents, so it's not as though the antelope has the right to live or something of that sort. But rather, on a Christian view, God has given us stewardship of this beautiful planet to care for it and not to pollute it and ravage it and destroy it. And so I think we have responsibilities toward the animals that would involve not just slaughtering them aimlessly, polluting the seas and destroying their environments and so forth, but that we would be like gardeners, in a sense, tending a garden in which there are not only vegetable life, but also there would be animal life as well. So I would see this as rooted in the divine responsibilities and mandates given to us to be good stewards of the earth.
Are you a vegetarian?
Not a bad answer.
No, I'm not.
So our steward.
It's not a bad answer. My answer would be that animals are our relatives. They're a part. We share our homes with them. They're a part of what allows our survival. They help our survival, and so I don't see. Animals want to survive and live just as much as we do. You see a bug fighting for its life, even though it may only have a 48-hour lifespan total. But it doesn't want to die. It doesn't give up. It fights to survive as much as possible, as much as humans do. If anything, humans have, taken their own lives more than any other animal has. Humans have given up on life more than any other animal has. That's really neither here nor there, but what I'm saying is they want to be here just as much as we do. And we share our homes with them. We share this planet with them. We need them. And I just don't see recklessly and pointlessly inflicting harm upon any other life. Is just not right in my eyes.
Stewardship towards animals only goes so far.
Right.
We can eat them. We can chop them up and wear them.
Yes. But.
And animals do want to be here just as much as we do. They definitely do.
That would be done in ways that would be, I think, compatible with certain kinds of rules.
No. So I'm not sure you get the advantage, as you put it, in that case. So,
but I mean, on naturalism, what can the naturalist say in the struggle for survival of the fittest? How is there any kind of ethic toward behavior toward animals?
My view wasn't survival.
Animals fight to survive and procreate just as much as humans do. Just because they don't think about it doesn't mean that they don't want to be here. They fight for their lives as much as humans do, and they protect their children as much as humans do, and they protect their species. They have instincts to do this, to survive. They want to survive just as if you smash a bug, it doesn't give up. It fights for its life until it's dead.
Survival of the fittest. My view was that what morality boils down to is don't harm and do help. And now the question is, can creatures like chickens and cows be harmed? And the answer is, of course they can. Consequently, I think it's immoral to harm them. And that seems to me to provide a very strong moral reason to be a vegetarian, to not wear leather, and the like. So I certainly will concede that your view allows for a space for a certain kind of limited responsibility towards the animals, but I beg to differ with the claim that you've got a better handle on that situation than I do. It seems to me that our treatment of animals is morally appalling. It's morally completely unacceptable, and that we ought to radically revise the way we live, precisely because they feel pain, they can be hurt, and we're constantly...
I disagree. I don't see us beneath animals. I mean, I don't see animals as beneath us. We're just, we have more consciousness than they do. I don't think their lives are less valuable than ours, honestly. I would I personally would value a human life over an animal, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think they're any less valuable than humans.
These creatures.
Let's talk about the difference between various societies. How do we explain differences in culture, the treatment of women, the treatment of different...
And I feel that way. I value another human's life over an animal because I'm a human. But a cat is going to value their kitten over another animal. That's just how species work.
Races, genders, sexualities in various societies, if there is a single God with a single morality, or if there is a social contract standard.
Now here I don't think there would be any significant difference between us in the sense that this is a question about moral epistemology, that is to say how we come to a knowledge of the good and the right, rather than a question of moral ontology, which is...
And no offense, but like, you can't call me silly on one hand and then say we're beneath angels. Like, you can't say don't be silly and then say we're beneath angels. Like, no offense, but we just have two different perspectives. It's not neither of us being silly, but you can't call me silly and then put out your own belief that I could call silly right back at you. But I wouldn't do that. But
it's a question about the objective reality of the good and the right. And I think we would both agree that the objective existence of moral values and duties doesn't imply that these are always easy to grasp, or that people infallibly do grasp them, given our human proclivity to selfishness and
so certain
sinfulness.
Societies haven't caught up?
Yeah, I have absolutely no qualms about being politically incorrect and saying that certain societies like National Socialist Germany were morally corrupt. Or Afrikaner South Africa, or...
what about Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, in its treatment of women, I think it's appalling. I think that once you have a transcendent moral standard that transcends culture and society, you're in a position to make the kind of judgments that the court did at Nuremberg in saying that these Nazi leaders were war criminals and were justly condemned for what they did. If you lack that transcendent standard, then I think you are faced with the problem of sociocultural relativism.
Well, as Greg says, this is, I think, actually a point in which we are in large agreement. I might not use the word transcendent here, but I think I agree otherwise with virtually everything he said.
Different worldviews is correct.
If the question is what's the explanation
And
of
that's
the fact that so many societies have had morally
comes into
appalling
play,
moral
like I was
codes,
just
the
talking
answer
about
in
earlier.
part is it takes a
We're at the
while
final
for
stretch
civilization
here.
to work its way up to recognize moral truth, just as it takes a while for civilization to work its way up to recognize truths in any other domain. So I believe in evolution. I believe for familiar, I was making a remark like this over dinner, that for familiar evolutionary reasons, we were built to think the world moved along roughly Aristotelian lines with regard to physics. It's bad physics, but it's understandable why evolution would select us to think that something like Aristotelian physics was so. Happily, evolution also implanted in us reasoning capacity to step back from the beliefs that it gave us at the ground level and to challenge them and to test them. And so we've worked our way up from Aristotelian physics, and similarly, it takes centuries to work our way up to the point at which we recognize that all people are equal. It takes centuries until we work our way up to the point at which we recognize that women count as much as men, blacks count as much as whites, and that animals count too.
I know, very nice. We'd like you to give some closing statements, just a few words.
Wow.
To the students.
Who's going to go first?
Who goes first?
Who went first?
I went first.
Why don't you go first?
Okay. I didn't prepare a
was a
closing
very
statement,
good
so this is
debate.
just, I'm going to just wing it.
I enjoyed it.
I've argued tonight that if God exists, then you do have an objective basis for moral values, moral duties, and moral accountability. And I don't think that that's ever been disputed tonight. The debate has been more about whether naturalism can give you these things. But we haven't really contested that if God exists, then you will have a sound foundation for morality. God's own holy and just nature will be the good and will define the good as all things relate to it. His commandments to love him and to love our neighbor as ourselves will furnish grounds for our moral duties and obligations that will be objective and transcultural. And then our lives will have a paramount significance because the moral choices we make really do make a difference. They have eternal consequences. So I think theism is tremendously attractive and would invite you to consider it for yourselves. By contrast, on naturalism, it's hard to see why these creatures we call Homo sapiens have intrinsic moral value. This moral contract seems to me to be just a fiction and not really anything more than a social convention that Homo sapiens conspire among themselves to fancy themselves valuable. And this is especially evident, I think, on materialism and determinism, where, as I say, making a moral decision is no different than a tree growing a branch. It's hard to see how a puppet and its movements can have moral significance. In terms of moral duties, again, without someone to prohibit something or to command something, it's very hard to see how things can be prohibited or commanded. That's very different than the law of contradiction, I think, because the law of contradiction doesn't prescribe behavior. It doesn't say to you, don't contradict yourself. You're free to do that if you want to. It just says if you do so, you're irrational. But the moral duties are giving you prescriptions for behavior, for ways you ought to behave. And it seems to me on atheism that they are just like rules of etiquette. And then finally, moral accountability. I've already talked about that, it's hard to see why we should always adopt the moral point of view rather than just act in our own self-interest on atheism, since it really doesn't make any difference in the long run. So I would just invite you as students to think deeply about whether or not theism isn't the better foundation for building your own moral life and a career that lies ahead of you.
Well, let me start on a note of agreement. I would want to invite all of you to think as well. I don't think the issues that we've been talking about this evening are at all easy or simple. I suppose it's probably obvious that we haven't settled anything here, but it's important to also point out that we've only begun to address any number of relevant issues. This is not the kind of topic that you can do justice to in an hour and a half. At best, it can whet your appetite for learning more. So on the one hand, I want to encourage all of you who haven't taken a class in moral philosophy to take a class in moral philosophy and see how some of the great minds through history of Western civilization have dealt with some of these issues. And similarly, I would encourage all of you, theists or not, take classes in religion. I hope I've said nothing this evening to suggest any kind of hostility to religion. Far from it. I think it's a view worth taking very, very seriously. Though I happen to believe that theistic beliefs don't play any essential role in grounding morality. Now, I sketched a view according to which there is morality, it's an objective fact in as robust a sense as it seems to me one might like. That morality is real and genuine, and I tried to lay out at least the rough outline of how that view might go. It seems to me that one essential point of disagreement between Craig and me is something that I asked about several times. It's this move, what to my mind is the move from the thought that without theism, then our actions don't have eternal cosmic significance, to the conclusion that, therefore, without theism, our actions don't have significance, objective moral significance. That just seems to me to be a mistake. It seems to me that if I love somebody, the reality of that loving relationship is valuable, of real value, of genuine, objective value, and it's not in any way threatened by the fact that I will die, my wife will die, my children will die, and eventually the universe will come to an end. The fact that billions and billions of years from now it's all going to be the same doesn't mean it's all the same now. I certainly want to concede that if you're looking for this kind of cosmic significance, atheism is not going to provide it for you. But that wasn't the subject of tonight's debate. The subject of tonight's debate was whether you needed that kind of cosmic significance to have morality. And on that issue, I'm quite confident the answer is no. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the end of the debate. This was Shelly, Kagan, and William Lane Craig. I'm not sure what his channel is, Closer to Truth. This is on the Veritas forum. It was from 2012, so it's quite an old debate.
Super fucking cool.
Yeah. I'm not really sure about their personal channels. But anyways. Okay, so
No.
thank you everybody for being here. This was my part 1 of morality. I'm gonna have another stream in a couple days. I'm not sure the exact day yet. I'll figure that out soon. And I'm gonna watch another debate. It's a much more recent debate. I think it might even be within this past year, if not within the past 2 or 3 years at most. They will be discussing, is morality objective or subjective? This debate topic was, is God necessary for morality? So it's a little bit different, but both topics discussing morality, obviously. I think this was a really good stream. I know a lot of my viewers are Christian, and even though I'm not atheist, I'm also not Christian. So, but I really do enjoy these discussions that we have between the different worldviews we have, and just kind of sorting them out, even though we don't agree. ALC says, William Lane Craig is a boss. I have watched a couple of his debates now. He is a good debater, and yeah, I like him. He seems like a nice guy. He seems very intelligent. He makes a lot of good arguments. Seems like a smart, good guy. And I appreciate that he comes and does all of these debates. These debates are hard to find. These theology and type debates are hard to find for some reason. I don't know if it's just the Times or YouTube or something. I don't know. So if anybody has any debates that they want me to cover, I did put my email in the chat. You can comment below on the video too, or you can send suggestions to me at iamghosty@gmail.com. Send video suggestions. Yeah, so you can send them there. But yeah, I'm getting pretty tired and hungry, so I'm gonna head out for the night. Stay tuned coming up for the morality part 2. And when I have a final date for my upcoming Andrew Wilson debate, I will make you all aware of that as well. So yeah, please like the video and consider subscribing if you want. But yeah, thank you all for being here. Oh yeah, and the morality debate coming up. Yes, I am debating Andrew. I don't have a date yet because he's a pretty busy guy. The one date he threw out, I'm happened to be busy that one day. So he's going to be in Miami, but he said we will figure something out. So hopefully I'm not announcing this too early, but we're figuring something out. So I know. We'll see what happens. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And oh, right. The morality part 2 coming up is going to be an open panel discussion. So if you want to come on the stream and actually discuss the video we're watching while we're watching it and have conversations live during the stream, you don't have to show your face. That will be an open panel discussion for morality part 2. So yes, but for now I'm gonna take off and have a good night, everybody. Bye.